Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with the best recordings of the Debussy and Ravel string quartets. Now, this has taken a long time to put together, and the reason is because I have just billions of recordings of these pieces. Most of the time they come coupled, not invariably, but I am featuring recordings where they do come coupled because that's just the logical way to do it. But first I want to talk about the works. You know, they come coupled because Debussy and Ravel each wrote one quartet. But there were plenty of French composers who only wrote one quartet. Fauré wrote one quartet, for example, and Dutil wrote one quartet, and some of those singleton quartets also make couplings to the Debussy and the Ravel. Other composers who wrote one quartet make a logical discmate because when you put the two quartets together, you've only got about 45 minutes of music or so. They're not terribly long, but quite often they do appear together with nothing else. That's fine too. So I've kind of divided the recordings up into segments depending on how the couplings go, and we'll talk about them within their little groups. And really all of these recordings, I have a dozen of them here, and we'll talk about some others as well, and they're all really good. These are works that are so iconic and have been performed so frequently by all the quartets in the universe, and mostly very, very well. So you're spoiled for choice, and what really is going to matter is the couplings and perhaps some details of ensemble sonority within the individual quartets. And that's a very personal thing. It really is. One of the tests that I use to see if I'm going to like a performance is the way that the quartet handles the pizzicati in the two scherzos of these two quartets. Because, you know, these quartets are quite frequently spoken of as related. I don't mean they're just conveniently coupled. I mean they're actually kind of related. That the Ravel, which came a little bit later, was based on the Debussy. It may have been, it may not have been. There are similarities and there are differences. And those similarities and differences are quite fascinating. And I'd like to spend a little time talking about them with some musical examples, just so you can get some idea instead of just having a disc and plonking it on and saying, it's the Debussy and the Ravel. Maybe you'll have a little more thoughtful listening session if you know what to listen for, or some of the things to listen for. There's lots to listen for. There was a wonderful review I read when I was in high school, I believe it was, about Debussy and Ravel quartets, and it said that Debussy and Ravel quartet performances, that is the quartets that play them, the performers, come in two categories. I forget who the critic was who invented this, but it was wonderfully resonant. They are lumpers and splitters. Lumpers tend to treat the two works as similar, and splitters tend to treat them as different. Now, the reality is they are different in some ways, they are similar in some ways, and so that distinction is really kind of nonsense musically, but it sounded terrific, and I was very impressed when I first read it. Then I got to know the works and realized it was kind of nonsense, but it's a fun way to think about it. So let's talk about one thing that the two quartets have in common. What they have in common is second movement scherzos. Both of them have the scherzo, the jokey dance thing, plays second, which rely on pizzicato textures. They're fabulously wonderful in terms of textures. And here I think you would be right to say that the Ravel probably was influenced to a certain extent by the Debussy quartet. I mean, they do have something in common there. And I'm going to play you the opening of the two scherzos because you'll see exactly what I mean. It's an obvious resemblance texturally, not thematically at all. And my reference recording for these examples is a wonderful historical recording, somewhat historical anyway, the Vlach Quartet. on Supraphon Archive. It's a Supraphon historical recording, but it's a stereo recording. The Vlach Quartet was just a wonderful, wonderful group. Czech quartets are a world unto themselves, and they were among the great quartets in the history of the universe. I mean, you had the Vague Quartet, and not Vague, they weren't Czech. Sorry, they were Hungarian. That's another universe. You have the Smetana Quartet. Thank you. There you go. And the Talich Quartet and the Kotzian Quartet. And now you have, and the Pinoca Quartet and the Pavel Haas Quartet. I mean, they're just wonderful, wonderful groups. The Skampa Quartet. I mean, it's a tremendous tradition, and it's a living tradition. It's still with us. And it's a marvelous, marvelous group of performers. So this is one of the older of Czech quartets. We also had the Janáček Quartet, the Prague Quartet. There are just lots of them. And they were all very, very good. And I think these performances are astoundingly fine. And one of the things that they are really, really good at is the pizzicati in the two scherzos, which they don't take too fast. And when you have that much pluck in your pizzicato, you don't have to take it too fast. You want to sit back and savor every ping and zip and pluck, and it's great. So here they are. First the Debussy, and then a little pause, and then the Ravel. And you'll hear the similarity between the two, and they're both the second movements. And so there you go. That's a similarity, and here it is. God, I love that music. I just adore that music. The Emerson Quartet, who I saw do this when I was in college, they did the scherzo of the Debussy as an encore. It makes a great encore. It really does. Either of these would make great encores. And of course, the whole quartet's wonderful. So that, I'm not going to put this away yet. So that is something similar. Now something different. And here's the fun part. The differences are also characteristic, or you can hear them very clearly if you compare the two scherzos. Both of these quartets are written in a type of cyclical form, the type of cyclical form that was common in France in Germanic works in sonata forms, and that was used most frequently by César Franck. They were all trained, all the composers in that Franckian tradition, except for Saint-Saëns, by the way, and essentially. And Fauré wasn't really either, but the other guys, all the people who wrote symphonies, they usually write big symphonies or sonata-type works, which include quartets and piano sonatas and violin sonatas in cyclical forms. And both of these works are, but they are cyclical in a very different way. Now, the Debussy Quartet begins, it's a more dense, more chromatic piece than the Ravel is. It sounds actually less like Debussy than the Ravel sounds like Ravel. Let's put it that way. The Ravel has that atmosphere of sweetness and enchantment that was typical of Ravel from the very beginning. Debussy was still finding himself when he wrote his quartet, and it is a cyclical Franckian Vincent Dandy type piece in many respects. But it opens right away with the motto theme. The very first thing you hear, yum-ba, ba-da-dum-ba-ba-ba-ba, ba-dum-ba, that is the motto. And when you listen to the scherzo, which is fabulous. The scherzo has that motto played initially by the viola, and the entire A section of the scherzo, and before you get to the trio, the middle section, is nothing but the motto, repeated over and over and over and over in this rhythm. Da 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 dum, ba da 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 ba 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 bum, ba da dum bum 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 bum. That's it. And it gets repeated, and you can hear dum bum ba da dum bum 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 bum, da 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 dum ba da dum bum 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 bum. The rhythm is different, but it's clearly the quartet's motto, and it becomes the accompaniment to the pizzicato theme in the scherzo. So I want to play you the opening of the Debussy, and then what we just heard, basically, in comparing the scherzos, the scherzo version. But I'll play you the whole initial A section, because the way it moves between the parts, and what Debussy does with it is marvelous. It's totally proto-minimalist and fascinating in its single-minded, neurotic emphasis on this tiny motivic cell, which is the motto of the entire quartet, and which you can hear in all of its movements. So here is the Debussy's essence, its motto. So there it is, as you first hear it when the quartet opens, and then as it returns in the second movement as the accompaniment to the scherzo. I just love that. I love that second movement. I think all of us love that second movement. It's just a fantastic thing. Okay, so that's that. Then we get to the Ravel. Now, the Ravel is cyclical in a rather different way than the Debussy. As I said, it has a very different character to it, a very different lyrical character than the Debussy does. It's much less rugged in some respects. However, the scherzo also contains a reference to the motto theme, but the motto theme in the Ravel is not the opening. It isn't the opening at all, although actually that sort of pops out. It's maybe even more motivic. I don't know. I'm not even going to go there. But the point I want to make is that the main idea in the first movement of the Ravel clearly is its second subject. It is a tune of such aching beauty. It is unbelievably beautiful. It's, yada, yada, da, 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 da. Oh, it's gorgeous. And the first theme you hear, the first lyrical theme in the scherzo, is that theme. It's inverted, kind of. It's a free inversion, but it's yada da 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 da. And it's basically the same theme. Do 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 do. If you speed up the second subject of the first movement, you basically get the theme of the scherzo. So let's listen to that now, and you can hear this slightly different take on the cyclical idea of form that both composers use, but they do it in their own individual ways. And so that is a similarity in that they're both cyclical, and a difference in how they're cyclical. And it's just quite marvelous. Here you go. Absolutely gorgeous. And what's fascinating about these two is you can hear how in the both in the first two movements of the Ravel, the underpinning is the same because the opening themes, both of the scherzo and of the opening movement, come back under those second subjects in exactly the same way. You really could say that the scherzo of the Ravel, which is much bigger than the scherzo of the Debussy, it's longer and more elaborate, is in fact a kind of development of the entire the exposition of the first movement. But after that, the two quartets diverge rather substantially, and you can tell right away just from the ensuing movements. The Debussy has a third movement, which is marked andantino, doucement expressif, very, very gently expressive and andantino, whereas the Ravel is très lent, very slow. It's a real adagio, and of a very different character. It's much, much more extended. The Debussy's finale, on the other hand, is très moderne, very moderately moving, and it's a big movement. It's big movement, 7.5 minutes. The Ravel is 5.5 movements, and it's marked vif et agité, quick and agitated. So after these very similar second movements, the two quartets diverge, and each goes its own way. And how they each go their own way while retaining the cyclical elements we've just discovered, I think is something I leave to you to enjoy. And we're going to talk about the recordings now. But I wanted to give you that little taste of each of them, and just to give you a sense that these are pieces they're so famous that we do tend to take them for granted. And they're very beautiful. And you just listen to them and it's like, oh, they're so beautiful. There's real musical substance here. Serious development. And it really, really does pay repeated listening and some serious time and attention and a nice sit down. If you've got both of them on one disc, they make for a wonderful comparison as to similarities and differences. So, recordings. Let's start with, let's see, what do we got here? 3 of them out of the 12. These are all recordings that are coupled with music by Fauré, not necessarily his quartet. And they are the Quatuor Eben on Erato. This is a group whose pizzicato I don't like, I have to say. I think they sound rather flimsy in their pizzicato, but their playing is otherwise extremely fine. And if you want the Fauré quartet, this is a nice way to get it with the Quatuor Eben, whatever it's called, on Erato. So that's a nice one to think about, and it's fairly recent. Fantastic recording on the Tatchett label with the Alrin Quartet, a group I cannot recommend highly enough. They are magnificent. Just a fantastic group. The Alrins have no pizzicato issue, and I particularly enjoy their recording of the Fauré, which is just gorgeous. So Fauré Quartet is an elusive work. It really is. It's very, very late, and it's in 3 movements, and it takes, you have to live with it for a while, and they penetrate its secrets rather well, I think, which is wonderful. Then we have Tokyo Quartet on Sony. They have not the Fauré Quartet, but the Fauré Trio, another very late work, as late as the quartet. And the performers in the trio are the Roth Trio, who consist of Andre Previn and Ferry Roth and Joseph Schuster. And it's a lovely performance of the Fauré Trio, which you don't get to hear very often outside of collections of Fauré chamber music. So this is fun. And the Tokyo Quartet is a splendid, splendid group, as you well know, especially in these earlier Sony recordings. They're just magnificent, and these are wonderful performances too. So those are three that you can consider if you like those couplings. Next, let's look at two of them that come with the Dutil string quartet. Now, the Dutil string quartet, Ainsi la nuit, so it's based on Starry Night by Van Gogh, the guy who cut off his ear and sent it to his girlfriend, and she sent him back that famous letter, "Dear Vincent, thank you so much for the lovely gift. It was delicious." Anyway, the Dutil Quartet is a masterpiece of contemporary quartet writing, and it will also take a little living with. It's kind of difficult to get your brain around at first, but it has wonderful, wonderful things in it, and it's nice to have coupled to the Debussy and the Ravel. First, I have the Juilliard Quartet. Now, the Juilliard Quartet recorded these pieces like a zillion times in its various groups. And, this is the digital Sony one. My favorite Juilliard, Debussy, and Ravel is the RCA one, the early one that was in the RCA Juilliard box. I think that those performances have a certain freshness and perkiness that perhaps these don't quite match, but they're all very, very good. And so I just hold this up as an exemplar, and because you get the Dutil Quartet with it. Another wonderful performance of the Dutil Quartet with the Debussy and Ravel is this one, the Orpheus String Quartet on Channel Classics. They are a terrific group. You may know, you've heard their Schubert Quintet. They did that with I think with Pete Vispilve or one of those guys, and they really were marvelous in that too. They're a wonderful, wonderful group, and I think let's see who's in it. Is anybody in there famous that I know about? Nah, who cares? I never remember any of these people. I just remember the name of the quartet. But it's a wonderful disc, and like most Channel Classics recordings, the sonics are a knockout. Absolutely stunning. So this is worth considering if you'd like the Dutil Quartet. So that's those. Now we're up to, let's see, that's another 5. Now we have 2 more. And these are 2 more that have miscellaneous other things, not necessarily other the French quartets, but just other things that go with the Debussy and Ravel. Here we have the Alban Berg Quartet, and they've coupled the Debussy and Ravel rather niftily with Stravinsky's music for string quartet, of which there's very little. You get the 3 pieces for string quartet, the concertino, and the double canon, and that about does it for Stravinsky and the string quartet. These are very similar to the Juilliard performances. The Alban Berg usually is. They were kind of like the Viennese Juilliard Quartet. They were supposed to combine, American precision with European warmth, all that bullshit that you keep hearing. It's nonsense. The Juilliard had more warmth than these guys did, as often as not, if warmth is one of your criteria. But they are a great quartet, just a great group. They really are. And this is a fantastic set. With the Stravinsky coupling, it makes it very interesting because unless you have like big Stravinsky boxes, it's not easy to find Stravinsky's music for string quartet. So that's really good. Then another really famous one is this DG original one with the Mellos Quartet of Stuttgart. It's how Germans spell quartet with 2 T's at the end. I used to take off the last T because I always thought it was a typo. It's not. It's intentional. There must be a reason for it. So these are really wonderful, and the coupling is also inspired. The Kodai String Quartet, which you almost never get to hear outside of Hungarian music, strange discs with other Hungarian things. And so this is a wonderful, wonderful disc to have if you're looking for the Kodai Quartet, in addition to wonderful performances of the Debussy and the Ravel. It's a good idea, so give it a shot. Now, the remaining 5 discs that we're talking about are just Debussy and Ravel discs. And I learned something very interesting a while back. I may have told this story before, but it really is true. It really is a fascinating phenomenon. People want what they want. And there's a tendency when the compact disc came out, because you could put up to 80 minutes of music on it, to have to fill it up. And some of the hardcore, the curmudgeonly classical collectors, CCC, the curmudgeonly classical collectors, always wanted 80 minutes worth of music. Always, 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 because we were cheap and stingy, and we wanted our money's worth. We wanted more, always more stuff. But that's not how most people shop. Not at all. Most people only want what they want. They're willing to pay to get what they want. And I learned this very, very interestingly when I was hanging out at Tower Records near Lincoln Center, and a lady came in who wanted Beethoven's Seventh. And all she wanted was Beethoven's Seventh. And you could not sell her a disc that only had Beethoven's Seventh, because you got the Seventh usually coupled with the Fifth, or with, it was the Beecham recording with the Ruins of Athens music on it, and she wanted Beethoven's Seventh. She heard it, she loved it, that's what she wanted. And she looked at all these other discs they were showing her one after the other, and she's like, what's that? No, I didn't want that. I don't want that. I just want this. That's all I want. Can I get a disc that just has that? Because she knew what she wanted. She knew what she had time for. She knew what she was willing to pay for. And it fascinates me. Now with digital media, digital downloads, people can get exactly what they want. And classical music people also have a complete neurotic fear of digital downloads. Some, not you guys. You guys are going at it. But, that major works will be split up into individual movements, and people will only want the second movement of something, and we'll lose track with our ability to listen to multi-movement or large sectional pieces whole, because you only need to get the little bit you want. You can ignore the rest. Well, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I don't think there's anything wrong with people getting exactly what they're willing to pay for. It can only increase the spread and the currency of classical music generally. But it's going to do it among people who are not hardcore serious collectors with endless quantities of time to spend listening to stuff that goes on for at length. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's a different market. It's a different segment of the music listening population that was not being served at all by the compact disc. It's really kind of an interesting phenomenon, and I'm tracking this to see how it shakes down. It really amazes me. So all of that is a long way of saying there is nothing wrong with buying the Debussy and Ravel string quartets, because you don't want Dutil, you don't want Kodály, you don't want Stravinsky, you don't want Fauré. You just want the Debussy and Ravel quartets because you know them and you've heard them and you love them and they're gorgeous, and that's enough. It is. It's enough. So I'm telling you, you can have both. You can have just one of them. You can have just the scherzos. Get what you like. The important thing is to keep on listening, as I keep saying. It's to listen to something. So with that in mind, the Talich Quartet on La Dolce Volta. Oh, they're such a great quartet. Another fantastic Czech quartet. These are beautiful, beautiful performances. They used to be on the Calliope label, or Calliope, or whatever you want to call it, but they are simply lovely. And so the Talich Quartet, I suppose is the way you pronounce it, the Talich or Talich or Talich or Talic, or it doesn't make any difference. They're wonderful. Just a wonderful group. Beautiful performances. Also, classics, and these are out of print, but I have to mention them because when they came out, they were fantastic. The Orlando Quartet on Philips. This disc is just, they put it out on CD. They didn't make many records, the Orlando Quartet. They popped up briefly doing Mozart quintets on Bis. Not necessarily the same configuration, but they made a couple discs on Philips, and they were really, really good discs. And that was it. And then poof, they were gone. These CDs came out, then poof, they were gone. But if you could find the Orlando Quartet doing Debussy and Ravel, this disc caused quite a stir when it came out, and deservedly so. It would now be on Decca, but of course it was Philips originally, and here it is on Philips. So I mentioned that in passing. A total classic, the Quartetto Italiano, the ultimate in quartet refinement, aristocratic polish, sophistication, gorgeous ensemble. I just love these performances. They are magnificent. They are so poised, so beautifully turned and fashioned, like everything this group did. There's a certain sound that the Italiano had that was sort of, almost an iconic idea of what string quartet sound should be like, and the give and take between the players is that the acme of Goethe's statement that a quartet is a civilized conversation between four whatever it was. You know what I mean? This is what they do, and it's very, very, very beautiful and wonderful to hear. This again is on Philips, but it's in the big Quartetto Italiano box. You may be able to find it somewhere else, but it's terrific, absolutely terrific. And finally, However, my fave, after this one, pardon me, the Vlach Quartet, which we used for your examples. You heard this for yourself, so I don't need to tell you how terrific it is. They're just great. I love it. But my favorite version that I keep coming back to, and it's going to be a surprise. This one is really a sleeper, but it's wonderful. The Gallimir Quartet on Vanguard. This was one of those performances. It just has such naturalness to it, such musicality, such freshness. It's just wonderful, and excitement too. Some real dazzling playing here and there. Felix Gallimir was one of the great violin pedagogues, and he put together this quartet and said, "Okay, guys, we're going to show them how to do the Debussy and the Ravel," and they do, and the sound is terrific. It's just a wonderful, wonderful example of truly cultured but passionate and exciting music making. Just fantastic. So the Gallimir Quartet on Vanguard is my pick, my personal pick. But as I said, any of these 12 and beyond other Juilliard versions. There are other versions. Some of these quartets did multiple recordings of these pieces. And of course, there are many, many, many versions by other string quartets that you will probably enjoy just as well. So there you go. The Debussy and the Ravel quartets and some others. Keep on listening, folks. Thank you for joining me. Take care.